Repairing a 5-inch gauge Modelworks Pannier tank, part 5, how to correctly calibrate the suspension. I am filling the boiler and water tanks before commencing this procedure so that the suspension has the correct running load applied during testing. The calibration procedure needs to be carried out in stages. Here's the underside view showing the initial adjustment of the spring hangers. This is done by tightening or slackening the nuts to move the position of the retainer bar up and down, applying more or less pressure to the springs. It's really important not to over-tighten these nuts. Do not compress the springs too much, otherwise there won't be any suspension. Later on in this video I show how bad the engine sounds when I over-tighten the suspension. This setting will do for starters. Time now to return the locomotive to the upright position. What I'm doing here is filling the tank that has the hand pump in it with water so I can pump it from the tank into the boiler. Initially I poured 2 pints of water into the tank and then I pumped this water using the hand pump, which is now repaired, into the boiler. I put about 4 pints of water into the tank, but not all at the same time. Then I pumped the contents of the tank into the boiler, and after quite a bit of pumping, the water level in the gauge glass was nearly at the top. As you can see, and more importantly here, the engine is sounding much better. I continued filling the boiler right to the top. In fact, I did fill it slightly too much. Now the boiler is almost full, the suspension is working well. With the boiler completely full, the suspension is performing very well. Even though the compressor's valve is set to pump 50 pounds per square inch into the boiler, I thought it was a good idea to make sure that the safety valve worked. Which, as you can clearly see, it did. I replaced the ornate safety valve cover and put some more water into the tank. In my workshop I use a quiet compressor. It's a Bambi with 2 refrigerator type pumps on the top, but by now these were getting a bit hot. You can hear the compressor running in the background. So I turned it off for a while and went and did something else. I turned on my TV and watched the news, which was horrific as usual. I never discuss religion or politics in these videos, but in this video I'm coming really close. But no, I'm not going to discuss politics or religion. After the news I went back to the job. The engine is starting much better than it did, particularly in reverse. It also runs forward, which was more than it did when I first received the engine to repair. Taking a look at the treads on the wheels, I really don't think this engine has done much rail running at all. By the looks of it, it hasn't been on a rolling road much either. Here I'm tightening the nuts on the rear wheel, because I felt that the suspension on the rear wheel was a bit soft. Now it's much better. I moved the engine up and down as shown while it was running. And doing this was a good thing because it was bedding in the axle boxes and they're feeling a bit freer now. I would think that after a few circuits around a proper track, the suspension should become a bit looser. The valve timing of the engine is not perfect, but it's close. In this episode there is a lot of suspension adjustment. In this clip I'm tightening every one of the nuts on the spring hangers. I want to show what happens when the suspension becomes ineffective by over-adjustment. I couldn't really tip the engine on its side because there's water in the tank, and also now it's very heavy. After a lot of tightening, this is what it sounds like. The knocking is partially due to the over-tightened suspension and partially due to the fact that the boiler is over full and water has gone into the cylinders and is blowing out of the chimney. I did notice there was no hydraulic lock, so the drain cocks on this engine, even though they are a bit bizarre, do appear to work. Now it's time for the final adjustment, or at least I hope so. I'm backing off the nuts, so I'm slackening the suspension very slightly. After this, I gave the engine another run. As an educated guess, I think that is the correct adjustment. Maybe a tiny bit more on the centre axle. In the last episode, I tried to show how to make sure that all the suspension was applying the same amount of pressure down onto the track. That way you get maximum pulling power, although this time I'm not using the same tool as previously. I'm using a box key just because it fits up against the flange and is the same distance on every wheel. This is a more scientific way of doing it, as the end of the box key is always up against the flange. In the last episode when I showed this, I used a socket driver, which wasn't ideal because it had to go underneath the flange. And by using that, the fulcrum was variable. Now it's fixed and I can accurately feel the amount of leverage required. Here once again is the engine running on the rolling road with the tanks and boiler full of water. The suspension is what is known as in the running position. No silly comments are required about the speed of operation of the reversing gear. It is perfectly fine. And that is it for this one. Stay safe, stay healthy. Thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful. Please take the time to visit my Mainsteam Models website and click on the section of the website that says Video Playlists. And by doing that, you can find other videos that you may like to watch. And by using the playlists, you can actually watch the videos back to back.